10 Queens of the Darkest Revenge in History Bedtime History Documentary. Tonight, we're stepping into candlelit palaces, silent stone fortresses, and battlefields where grief turned into something far darker. History remembers kings for conquest, but queens often mastered something colder. Patience. The kind of patience that waits through betrayal. The kind that smiles at the banquet table while planning what happens after dessert. Some sought justice for murdered husbands. Some avenged humiliation. Some destroyed entire bloodlines to protect a crown. And what makes these stories so haunting is that many of these women were later remembered not only as monsters, but as heroes, saints, and national legends. So tonight, as the world grows quiet, let's journey through the lives of 10 queens whose revenge became the stuff of legend. And by the end, you may wonder whether history judged them too harshly or not harshly enough. It begins in the 10th century with one of the most chilling revenge stories ever told. Princess Olga of Kiev's husband, Prince Igor, was murdered by the Drevlians, a rival tribe. They assumed the young widow would be politically weak. They were wrong. First, the Drevlians sent envoys to ask Olga to marry their prince, believing it would unite the kingdoms. Olga welcomed them warmly. Then she had them carried, still alive, in their boat and dropped into a giant trench where they were buried alive. But she wasn't finished. A second delegation arrived. Olga invited them to bathe before the meeting. Once inside the bathhouse, the doors were barred and the building was set on fire. Then came the funeral feast. She invited thousands of Drevlians to honor Igor's memory. Once the wine flowed and the men were too drunk to resist, her soldiers slaughtered them. And finally, she asked the city for tribute, just 3 birds from every house. A peaceful request. The birds were released with burning cloth tied to their feet, returning to their nests and setting the entire city ablaze. It was revenge carried out with terrifying imagination. And yet later, Olga converted to Christianity and became a saint. History rarely gives us contradictions this sharp. Next comes Queen Tomyris of the Massagetay, one of the ancient world's fiercest rulers. The Persian king Cyrus the Great tried to conquer her lands. He used trickery, and in the chaos, her son was captured and later died. For Tomyris, this was no longer war. It was personal. She led her army against Cyrus and crushed the Persian forces. But the revenge did not end there. Legend says she found Cyrus's body, cut off his head, and plunged it into a skin filled with blood, declaring, "Drink your fill of blood, since you thirsted for it." Whether every detail is true or not, the image survived because it captured something unforgettable, a queen whose grief became myth. Then there was Isabella of France, later known as the She-Wolf. Married to King Edward II of England, Isabella spent years humiliated as her husband openly favored others and ignored her influence. Then came opportunity. Sent abroad on royal business, she built alliances, gathered support, and returned to England not as a neglected wife, but as an invader. Her forces swept through the kingdom. Edward's favorites were executed. The king himself was captured and later died mysteriously in prison. For a time, Isabella ruled through her son as regent. The abandoned queen had transformed herself into the most feared woman in England. Some revenge stories are born not from heartbreak, but from power. Empress Irene of Byzantium ruled first as regent for her son Constantine VI. But when he tried to take full control, mother and son became bitter rivals. Then Irene made her move. Her son was seized and brutally blinded, almost certainly on her orders. In Byzantine politics, blinding was often worse than death. It permanently destroyed a ruler's legitimacy. Irene then crowned herself as sole ruler. It remains one of the coldest family betrayals in royal history. Queen Ranavalona I of Madagascar took revenge on anyone she believed threatened her throne. Nobles, missionaries, rival heirs, and advisors all became targets. Executions, poison trials, and purges followed. To her enemies, she was cruel and terrifying. To others, she was the ruler who kept foreign colonizers out. That tension makes her legacy fascinating. Was it revenge, paranoia, or simply survival? Sometimes the answer depends on who writes the history. In the brutal courts of early medieval Francia, Queen Fredegund rose from servant to queen through pure cunning. Once in power, she defended it mercilessly. Rivals, princes, heirs, and nobles died one by one under suspicious circumstances. Poison, assassins, and deadly political traps became her weapons. Her feud with Queen Brunhilde became one of Europe's most violent royal rivalries. Fredegund's revenge was not one dramatic act. It was a lifetime strategy. Then there was Agrippina the Younger, perhaps the most dangerous woman in imperial Rome. After surviving exile, palace intrigue, and the murder of relatives, she learned to strike first. She married Emperor Claudius, maneuvered her son Nero into becoming heir, and according to many ancient writers, may have poisoned Claudius when the time was right. But revenge has a way of circling back. The son she elevated of those who once scorned her found themselves facing the wrath of one of history's most feared rulers. Sometimes revenge doesn't require your own hand. Sometimes it needs the right son. Queen Brunhilde's revenge story lasted nearly 40 years. After her sister was murdered in a rival Frankish court, Brunhilde never let go of the hatred. The result was decades of war, assassinations, betrayals, and collapsing alliances. Children inherited the feud. Grandchildren continued it. Entire regions suffered because two queens refused to forgive. This was revenge turned into inheritance. And finally, Cleopatra. After the defeat of Mark Antony, Cleopatra knew what awaited her if Octavian captured her alive. Chains, humiliation, a Roman triumph parade. So she denied him the satisfaction. Her death, whether by asp, poison, or another method, was her final act of control. A queen's last refusal. If Rome wanted her alive as a trophy, she would become immortal as a legend instead. And in that sense, she won. What makes these queens unforgettable is not simply cruelty. It's that their revenge often came from places history easily understands: grief, betrayal, humiliation, fear, and survival. The difference is that ordinary people may hold grudges. Queens could move armies. They could bury diplomats alive, burn cities with birds, blind heirs, poison emperors, and erase bloodlines. Yet centuries later, many are still remembered as heroes, saints, and founders of nations. Perhaps that is the strangest truth of all. In history, revenge is rarely remembered as simple revenge. It becomes legacy. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, ask yourself, were these queens villains, or simply rulers who understood that mercy was a luxury power could not afford? And if history had handed you a crown in a world of betrayal, would you have done anything differently?